G'day. A few episodes ago, someone asked a question about how do I start in metalworking, and I don't really like that question too much because it all depends on where you are and what you want to do and what facilities you've got available to help you learn and all that sort of thing. But I decided, well, I'll put together a general clip on, in this case, the mill and the accessories that I use with the mill, and trying to give a brief rundown of what they are, what they do, so that if you're in that position where you're trying to work out, well, what do I need to buy, you've got at least a basic understanding of what the various parts are used to do, and that might colour your thoughts. It's often said that you buy a mill and then you spend that again on accessories, and that's true to an extent. So you just need to bear in mind that you don't want to go and buy everything in the shop or everything that you see, because it may not be applicable to you. But there are some bits and pieces here, some more general bits and pieces which I go through, which are worth knowing about. And once again, before I start, I'll reiterate that this is my opinion, my experience. Other people have different ideas. Think about what's works for you. But in terms of milling, what you probably need to start with is something like a reasonable vise and a strap clamp set. Now, you can get away without a strap clamp set. You can do that with washers and bits of tin and steel and stuff that you've drilled holes in, and bolts and funny shaped nuts and all that sort of thing. But this is one of those bits of kit that they're not all that expensive. You will use a lot over the lifetime of you and the mill when you're doing this stuff, so you may as well buy it. This is a set off eBay. They're generally nothing special. They're a soft steel. You can see that occasionally I do run into them. It happens. But as a basic starting point, that's a good idea. Vise, this is a Vertex Anglock vise. What it does is there's a ball arrangement in there which pulls that moving jaw down and helps clamp the material, keep it flat. They come with a handle like that. As some of you have noticed, I use a speed handle for most of the time, although I still use this if I have to really make sure something is tight. The other thing you might want in terms of mill tooling is an indicator or a dial test indicator, magnetic base, and that's simply so that you can tram things in. You can make sure things are square or parallel to axes and that sort of thing. It's a good idea. Now, once you've got these things, in theory you're good to go. However, there are a couple of things that make life easier and are worth getting as a beginning set of tooling. You'll need a soft-faced hammer, mallet, whatever you want to call it. That's a dead blow one. That's just a plain nylon-faced hammer. When you put something into the vise, you want to make sure it's right down, so you'll tap it. Now, if you give it a great big whaling on it, what'll happen is the material will go down, but it'll bounce back up again. And so you're after gentle sort of taps, and that's where the dead blow hammer helps, to just make sure it goes down and stays down. There's all sorts of bits and pieces about using bits of cigarette paper there to make sure it's down and in the right position, all that sort of stuff. Yes, you can do that. Whether it's really worth it, I'm not going to say. The other thing you don't need immediately, but you probably need sooner or later, is a set of parallels. These are a Starrett set made in Scotland, and I've had these for quite some time. You don't have to necessarily have a set of parallels. You could get by with bits of tool steel. If you've got a lathe and you've got some bits of tool steel, you could use those in there too. But that does make it convenient. If you've got thin pieces of stuff that you want to lift up in the vise, having a set of parallels is good. In terms of basic tooling, there's probably only a few pieces you need. One is a drill chuck. If you're going to be drilling holes when you're using a mill, then you want a drill chuck. You can't use this for milling cutters, and the reason is that the side forces will shake the tool out of the chuck. So this is purely for drilling holes, but much easier to use than something that'll hold a milling cutter, although it could do double duty. If you got one of these, a collet chuck, you could put drills in that. So if you're looking to save money, you can't afford too much in the way of tooling at the moment, you could use that. This is an ER40 chuck, and it goes up to 30mm diameter stock. Most of the tooling I use, pretty much all of the tooling I use, is 19mm or less, and so I don't need to have a 40. I got the 40 because I can also use these in the lathe. Now that I've got the multicolored chuck, the Pratt and Bernard version on the lathe, I could have possibly gone to an ER32 or maybe a 25. I don't need that range, but it's one of those things. I bought at the time because I did. There we go. So this will hold anything up to, as I said, 30mm and down to about 3mm, and that's plenty big enough. As you get more experience and all that sort of thing, you might want to make your own, you might want to do all sorts of things with them, but that'll get you started. Another thing you may or may not want is a facing cutter. This one's got carbide inserts on them. You can get them with high-speed steel, but this works, and this is for basically doing flat surfaces. You can also use fly cutters and all those sorts of things, but if you see yourself doing large flat areas, then this might be a worthwhile thing to try and get. And the last one I've got on my list is a boring head. I've actually got several boring heads. This is the one I use most often. This is a Kaiser Piccolo, and it's a piece of Swiss made kit, very nice. But you can buy cheap boring heads and they work. The way they work is they have a tool in the bottom with an edge, and through some means you wind the tool out until you get the hole you want. And so if you're planning on doing holes with any accuracy and of size greater than you can get with a drill bit, then a boring head is what you need. And those 4 items, provided you have all the collets you need for the collet chuck, they're good enough to get you started. One of the biggest improvements that you can make to a mill is to fit a DRO. Now some mills, if you're buying them new particularly, they'll come with one fitted already, but refitting one or fitting one to a machine, it's not horribly difficult. It takes a little bit of care, but you can do it. The reason why this is such a great improvement is that not only does it give you a precise position, X and Y, and for this matter Z, you can get 2 axes on a mill. Well, that's okay. But it also gives you things like PCDs and radii and all that sort of stuff. I don't use most of this stuff. I do use the PCD function occasionally, but it just makes it that much more easily to get your cutter where you want it and do the right thing. So for instance, I'm going to be doing some pocketing in a moment, and it'll let me come into the same spot, come across, come out, back round, drop down a little bit, and do that again without having to worry about, is there backlash in the screws, is there backlash in the dials, have they slipped, all that sort of stuff. Now we start getting into the stuff that depends on what you want to do. So if you're going to do a lot of long parts, then a second vise, and that's another nice thing about the vertexes, is that they, the sales literature suggests that they'll be the same height, and I've found that to be pretty much true. If you're like me and you have a keyed vise, it's probably better to have the second vise unkeyed, and that way if there is any slight misalignment, you don't pull your part one way or the other. What if you want to cut funny angles? Well, You could buy something like this. This is a vise with 3 axes of adjustability, so it'll swivel that way, and swivel this way. They're fools of things, really. They're difficult to get right, and you've only got sort of, degree graduations here, so it's not the sort of thing that I'd be recommending for using all the time. But for the odd occasional thing, which I use it for, it's probably all right. Now, if you've got a Bridgeport mill, you can also cant your head over a bit so you can get an angle that way. But the most, shall we say, reliable way of getting an angle is with one of these. This is a sine plate, so called because it uses the sine principle to set the angle. In the back here are some gauge blocks, Joe blocks, whatever you want to call them, and it uses the sine principle that's a known, from that roller to this roller is a known distance, and so therefore it's just jacking the table up on some blocks and then securing it with these stays. It's got to be set up properly. I've had to tram this in, and then I've had to tram the material in, and so I can get it right, but that will give me, in this case, a 44.5 degree angle. Then there are these things. These are referred to as angle plates. Typically they are a right angle, but these are good if you've got something that, something like this, say you want to drill a hole in the end. Putting that in a vise, you're going to have this thing flopping around, and so one option is to clamp it to an angle plate. Gives you much more support over the part. I've got a pair of small ones, and I've also got a larger one for other odds and sods. Occasionally I do use the larger one, mainly the small ones, easy to handle, but that's another bit of kit that you might want to think about if you're going to be doing, tallish parts that won't sit in a vise or won't, strap down to a table terribly easily. So far I've talked about devices that mill in straight lines. Now we've got devices that among other things, mill in curved lines. Now, I would regard the rotary table as the sort of the next most important accessory that you can get after a vise. You can get plates for these, so they can act as a sort of a pseudo dividing head as well. So if you've only got the money for one, then maybe a rotary table is the way to go. Most of them can be used both in a vertical configuration like this, but also in a horizontal configuration like that. Some can't, so you just got to watch that. But apart from that, they're a good thing to have. My rule of thumb is you don't want one of a diameter greater than your table. This one is approaching 30 kilograms, which is why I put the crane in. So I certainly wouldn't say, yes, go bigger, because the trouble is if you have it overhanging your table here, you're going to bash into your column. And you've only really got the travel of your machine anyway, which is usually something like the table width. So there's not much point. If you can get away with a smaller one, great. I have a false table I made up, 250mm diameter, which I can also put on this. But a lot of the time, you don't need it. That's just for that extra bit of stretch where your clamps won't quite get there. The last one I want to show you, these dividing heads. I have two, partly because I'm a bit of a sucker for bits of equipment which are broken but can be repaired, partly because of I want to be able to sometimes stack this on, say, the rotary table. You know, I'm just that sort of person. This one has been modified. I've put a cam locked chuck on here. Normally they would just have a normal chuck like that one. The difference being that this is what's referred to as a semi-universal head, and this is a universal, and it's universal because it can be driven off the back here, and either through the chuck down to here for differential indexing, or driven by the table of the mill, and so you can do helical milling. This one is just straight indexing round. I guess the advantage these have over a rotary table is that you can get a lot more divisions out of these than you can necessarily with a rotary table. For this one you can do you know, the fabled 127 tooth gear, for example, whereas you can't do that just on a semi-universal or on a rotary table. So, you know, they're used for doing things like gears, or if I've got something that needs some equispaced, you know, lobes or something like that on there, I'll use one of these. Usually it's this one if it's just a small simple task. If it's a bigger thing, I'll be using this one, and soon I've got to use this one to cut a 77 tooth gear, so that'll be fun. So that's about it. So these, yes, if you're going to cut gears, dividing head. If you just want a general purpose thing, you could get by with a rotary table. You could do both of these using a rotary table. It's when you get into tricky prime numbers and that sort of thing that you have trouble. So thanks for watching, and hope this has been of interest and of help to people who are, you know, looking at all this sort of stuff and trying to work out, well, what do I do now?